June 1st, 2017, the first day of the Atlantic hurricane season. Over the preceding 12 years, the United States had dodged bullet after bullet, and an entire generation of Americans had grown up without having to bear the brunt of a major hurricane since 2005's Hurricane Wilma. But over the following several months, the major hurricanes would return to the United States in truly spectacular fashion. In 2017, the Atlantic Basin would churn out 17 named storms, 10 hurricanes, and 6 major hurricanes. But amongst the barrage of storms, 3 would be set apart from the rest, carving their places in history. Harvey.
But the edge of the eye wall has reached the barrier island.
The water, it really does seem to be everywhere.
Irma.
The majority of Florida will have major hurricane impacts with deadly storm surge and life-threatening winds.
The entire housing stock was damaged.
And Maria.
The winds are ferocious right now, gusting above 120 miles per hour.
People here feel paralyzed and disconnected.
These 3 storms alone were responsible for nearly $300 billion in damages and forever altered the communities affected. Join me as we relive the fury and examine the legacy of the costliest hurricane season the world has ever seen. I'm CJ, and this is Florida Man Weather. While the 2017 Atlantic hurricane season officially spanned from June 1st to November 30th, the season was hell-bent on writing history from the very beginning. The season actually had started prematurely, with Tropical Storm Arlene becoming only the second ever tropical storm on record to form in the month of April, nearly 2 months prior to the official start of the season. In hindsight, Arlene served as a harbinger of things to come, a signal that the Atlantic had been primed for volatility. Heading into the heart of the 2017 season, most global computer models actually anticipated a neutral to weak El Niño phase developing in the Pacific Ocean. Remember that historically, El Niño suppresses Atlantic hurricane activity by increasing the vertical wind shear, that's the changing of wind direction with height, that tear developing storms apart. This led pre-seasonal forecasts to grossly underestimate what was coming. Colorado State University's April outlook predicted 11 named storms and 4 hurricanes, numbers that would have reflected a near-average year. But as spring gave way to summer across the northern hemisphere, the expected El Niño failed to materialize. Instead, cool neutral conditions gave way to the onset of La Niña late in the season. This La Niña, coupled with an anonymously warm tropical Atlantic, created conditions ripe for hurricane formation. The atmosphere over the basin featured lower sea level pressures, weaker trade winds, and abundant mid-level moisture. All those ingredients would foster the development and persistence of intense tropical cyclones. As forecasters recognized the patterns setting in, predictions were revised upward. Yet even the most aggressive forecasts did not envision the cluster of catastrophes that would arrive late that summer. As the season finally drew to a close in late November, both meteorologists and the public were stunned. In total, the Atlantic pumped out 17 named storms, 10 hurricanes, and 6 major hurricanes, just 1 major shy of tying the 2005 record. But storm counts, they only tell part of the story. To measure a season's overall power, meteorologists use something called accumulated cyclone energy, or ACE for short. Think of ACE like a scoreboard. Short-lived weak storms barely move the needle, but a long-lasting Category 4 will rack up huge points. These ACE scores then fall into 4 ranges: below normal, near normal, and above normal, and extremely active on the high end. In 2017, the season's ACE hit 224.9 units, an astronomical number and far into the extremely active category, cementing the season's legacy as the 7th most energetic Atlantic hurricane season on record. What also made 2017 exceptional was not just the raw activity and powerful storms, but also the timing and the clustering of the systems. August yielded 4 hurricanes in 3 weeks: Franklin, Gert, Harvey, and Irma. And September also produced a dizzying succession of storms: Jose, Katia, Lee, and Maria. And at one point, 3 hurricanes, Irma, Jose, and Katia, were active and threatening land all at the same exact time. This kind of ominous atmospheric choreography was something that had not been seen since the legendary seasons of the late 2000s and early 2010s. All told, the season's 10 hurricanes formed in succession, tying an all-time record for consecutive hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin. Amongst them were two Category 5 behemoths, Irma and Maria, both of which would make landfall at their full intensity. Only one other season in recorded history, 2007, had witnessed two storms making landfall at a Category 5 intensity, and at the time of this recording, is still the most recent example of this happening. While the 2017 season included many other storms, its collective remembrance is still dominated by that trio of catastrophic hurricanes that all struck within a span of just 4 weeks. And as August 2017 would draw to a close, attention from the entire meteorological community would turn to the Western Gulf of Mexico. It was here that a struggling tropical storm would begin to reorganize in the Bay of Campeche. And no one could imagine that this innocuous, zombified remnant of a tropical system would be the storm that reawakened America to the reality of a catastrophic hurricane landfall. On August 17th, 2017, the National Hurricane Center began advisories on a tropical wave east of Barbados that strengthened into Tropical Depression 9. Within hours, the system strengthened into a tropical storm and was given the name Harvey. For islanders across the Lesser Antilles, it was a familiar late summer threat, and Harvey would brush across the islands of Barbados and St. Vincent on August 18th, bringing with it some squally weather but little else. And by August 19th, the storm actually seemed destined to be forgotten. Increased northerly wind shear would tear apart the fledgling system's circulation, and Harvey would actually degenerate not into just a tropical depression, but all the way down into an open tropical wave over the Central Caribbean later that next day. For several days thereafter, Harvey's remnants would continue moving westward, albeit as nothing more than disorganized thunderstorms. But it was in the Bay of Campeche on August 23, 2017, where conditions would shift dramatically, and the storm's future would be rewritten. The system found itself in an area of sea surface temperatures which soared above 86 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 30 Celsius. And the wind shear plaguing the system would finally relax, allowing moisture to once again pool in the atmosphere and the disheveled remnants to coalesce into a defined low-pressure center. The National Hurricane Center had declared that Harvey was reborn. And once Harvey had reorganized in the Bay of Campeche, forecasters at the NHC immediately recognized the danger. Conditions were primed for rapid intensification, and what was a modest tropical storm at the time began strengthening with frightening speed. When the NHC resumed advisories that same day, for the first time in a very long time, hurricane watches were issued from Port Mansfield, Texas to San Luis Pass, alongside tropical storm and storm surge watches for much of the Texas coastline. And within 24 hours, these alerts escalated into full hurricane storm surge warnings, covering coastal Texas counties from Matagorda to High Island, including Corpus Christi, Texas's 8th largest city. With the warning from the NHC now crystal clear, the state of Texas braced for impact. On August 23rd, Governor Greg Abbott would declare a state of emergency for 30 Texas counties, later expanding it to 50, while officials would order mandatory evacuations of the coastal areas in Brazoria, Calhoun, Jackson, Refugio, San Patricio, Victoria, and Matagorda counties. Federal and state resources surged into place, and FEMA began staging supplies. By the evening of August 25th, Harvey had transformed into a major hurricane and was now barreling toward the Texas coast as a Category 4, with sustained winds of 130 miles per hour or 215 kilometers an hour. It was the first major hurricane to strike the United States since 2005, and Texans now faced the onslaught of both the catastrophic winds and a deluge of record-shattering rains. Finally, at around 10 o'clock p.m. Central Daylight Time on August 25th, 2017, Hurricane Harvey would make landfall near Rockport, Texas, on San Jose Island. Its maximum sustained winds reached 115 knots, that's 130 miles per hour, and the central pressure bottomed out at 937 millibars. For the residents of Rockport, Aransas Pass, and Port Aransas, the hours that followed would define their lives. The wind would tear buildings apart, metal roofs peeling away like tinfoil. Transmission towers would collapse, and in Rockport, the high school's gymnasium was reduced to rubble, with dozens of small businesses also destroyed. The local courthouse, police station, and fire department, all symbols of civil stability, were heavily damaged, rendering emergency response chaotic. In addition to the punishing winds, the coastal communities along Texas's Gulf Coast also endured Harvey's devastating storm surge. Between Port Aransas and Matagorda Bay, surge heights reached 8 to 10 feet above ground. Capano Bay and Aransas Bay would inundate nearby towns. Yet, Harvey's story was not to be defined by its landfall winds or surge. After making landfall, Harvey would become trapped between two competing high-pressure systems. With no prevailing winds to steer it, the storm would stall out and linger over southeast Texas, with its meandering circulation continuing to pump in copious moisture from the Gulf and funneling it northward into southeast Texas and the Houston metropolitan area, home to over 6.8 million people. For 4 grueling days, Harvey's outer rain bands would train repeatedly over the same areas, and the result was absolutely apocalyptic. In some areas, rainfall totals would exceed 60 inches. That is 5 feet of rain, an amount once considered meteorologically impossible in the United States. And in Nederland, Texas, the official rain gauge would record a high of 60.58 inches, setting a national record for rainfall from a tropical cyclone. Houston, the nation's 4th largest city, would become a sprawling lake. The metro area's freeways would turn into rivers, and subdivisions would disappear beneath the floodwater. George Bush Intercontinental Airport would shut down entirely, and hospitals had to be evacuated by boat and helicopter. In the city's Meyerland neighborhood, families fled to their rooftops, waving at rescue helicopters, eerily reminiscent of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. And the scale of the disaster, that would quickly overwhelm local and state authorities. And by August 27th, the U.S. Coast Guard had mobilized dozens of helicopters and high water rescue vehicles. Meanwhile, volunteers, many just average people from across Texas and from neighboring states, would arrive as part of the Cajun Navy, bringing fleets of fishing boats and airboats and assisting officials with the vast amount of water rescues required in the city, becoming everyday heroes. More than 300,000 structures were flooded, and nearly 500,000 cars were destroyed. In Harris County, which includes Houston and is home to nearly 4.6 million people, nearly 200,000 homes alone were damaged. Harvey's financial toll was staggering, with damages estimated at $125 billion, that's 2017 dollars. It is now tied with Hurricane Katrina as the costliest natural disaster in U.S. history. Once again, mainly the result of flooding. Harvey revealed a sobering reality that we've heard time and time again, that Houston's rapid urban expansion had paved over the wetlands and floodplains that previously made up most of the area, leaving little natural absorption capacity. Concrete sprawl then would channel rainfall into bayous and reservoirs that were already straining at their limits. Add to this the storm's stalling behavior, and the result was utterly catastrophic, with entire neighborhoods that had never even before flooded becoming swamped. Many homeowners in the Houston area also lacked flood insurance, believing themselves to be safely outside of FEMA's designated flood hazard zones. The storm would spur national debate about urban planning, flood mapping, and the adequacy of the National Flood Insurance Program. Beyond human structures, Harvey also left a profound environmental imprint. The storm's floodwaters overwhelmed Houston's industrial areas, home to some of the largest petrochemical refineries in the world. As a result, more than 40 toxic spills were reported, many of them releasing thousands of gallons of oil, gasoline, and industrial chemicals, not only into the surrounding neighborhoods, but the surrounding waterways. Wildlife refuges along the coast, including the Aransas National Wildlife Refuge, would experience habitat loss from saltwater intrusion and storm surge. Marshlands were reshaped with unknown long-term consequences for migratory bird populations and fisheries. The federal response to Harvey, luckily, was actually in many ways more effective than responses to earlier disasters, learning from events such as Hurricane Katrina. FEMA pre-staged supplies and personnel, and President Donald Trump signed a federal disaster declaration before Harvey even made landfall. Still, the challenges were absolutely immense. More than 42,000 people sought refuge in shelters across Texas at the storm's peak. The George R. Brown Convention Center in Houston sheltered nearly 10,000 alone. But for meteorologists, Harvey was a landmark event. Its stalling mechanism became a case study in how weak steering currents can transform a landfalling hurricane into a catastrophic flood machine. Historically, the primary fear for major hurricanes had been wind or surge, but Harvey proved that rainfall alone, given sufficient duration, could rival or exceed those threats. Harvey also ended a 12-year drought of major hurricane landfalls in the United States. Since Hurricane Wilma in 2005, no Category 3 or stronger hurricane had struck the continental US, but Harvey broke the streak and opened the floodgates, figuratively and literally, for what would become a relentless season. Social media became a lifeline, with residents using Twitter and Facebook to plead for rescues. The hashtag HoustonStrong spread as a rallying cry for resilience, and perhaps the most striking was the outpouring of solidarity. Volunteers drove hundreds of miles to help strangers. Businesses donated trucks and supplies, and faith-based organizations mobilized kitchens and shelters. Harvey became not just a story of devastation, far from it, but of human compassion. But above all, Harvey left an indelible scar on Texas. Even as rebuilding continues years later, many neighborhoods still bear visible reminders. Vacant lots where homes once stood, businesses shuttered, and families displaced. The storm altered the geography of Houston, both physically and emotionally. But with all the destruction, it's hard to believe, even today, that Harvey was only the beginning. As Texas was reeling from its devastation, meteorologists were already watching another system roll off of the coast of Africa. That would, within days, grow into one of the most powerful hurricanes ever observed in the Atlantic Basin, setting its sights on the islands of the Caribbean and beyond lay the Florida Peninsula. On August 27, 2017, while Texas was still under siege from Harvey's rains, a tropical wave slipped off the west coast of Africa near Senegal. At first glance, it was unremarkable, one of dozens of disturbances rolling off the continent each summer. But somehow, we knew. Some storms, they seemed to be marked to become impactful. And as the areas around the Atlantic Basin looked on, this tropical wave would organize into a tropical depression on August 30th, and within 6 hours would strengthen into a tropical storm and earn the name of Irma. What happened next? That would stun even the most seasoned meteorologists. In just 30 hours, Irma rocketed from a tropical depression to a Category 3 major hurricane, with sustained winds of 115 miles per hour. Irma's rapid intensification underscored the fertile environment of 2017. As the storm moved westward across the Atlantic, Irma's intensity fluctuated briefly as it battled internal dynamics, eyewall replacement cycles, and dry air intrusions. But as September 4th arrived, Irma began a process of organization, its eye sharpening into a perfect circle, its cloud tops cooling as convection deepened, and turned into a storm for the ages. By 8 a.m. Atlantic Standard Time on September 5th, 2017, Irma had achieved Category 5 status, with its maximum sustained winds screaming at 180 miles per hour, and a central pressure plunging down to 914 millibars. On satellite imagery, the storm structure was breathtaking. A massive, circular eye surrounded by perfectly symmetric convection. Meteorologists described it as perfectly textbook, a storm as close to physical perfection as the atmosphere could produce. And for the next 60 hours, longer than nearly any other Atlantic hurricane on record, Irma would maintain this peak Category 5 intensity. Its winds leveled everything in their path, and the storm's sheer size compounded the danger. Tropical storm force winds extended outwards nearly 200 miles from its center, and hurricane force winds, they reached out 80 miles from the center. This meant Irma was not just intense, but a sprawling system that threatened to devastate nearly everything in its path. On September 6th, Irma made landfall on the tiny island at peak intensity. The storm's 180 mile per hour winds devastated everything on the island, with over 90% of the structures on Barbuda being damaged or destroyed. The island's sole hospital was even rendered inoperable. But amazingly, out of the island's tiny 1,600 person population, only one would lose their life. But unfortunately, nearly everyone on the island was left homeless. The Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda would later declare the entire island uninhabitable and would order the entire population of the island to be evacuated to the other island of Antigua, marking the first time in nearly 300 years that Barbuda was left without permanent residents. From Barbuda, Irma barreled west-northwest into Saint Martin and Saint Bartholomew. On the French side of Saint Martin, officials reported that 95% of the buildings were damaged, airports were destroyed, and communications would collapse. Looting erupted in the aftermath, compounding the chaos. And in St. Bart's, entire marinas were destroyed, with yachts flung ashore like toys. Next would come the Virgin Islands. On September 6th, Irma's eye swept directly across Virgin Gorda, Tortola, and Jost Van Dyke in the British Virgin Islands. Winds would exceed 180 miles per hour, and even seismic instruments would record vibrations from the hurricane's passage. 4 people in the British Virgin Islands were killed, thousands were displaced, and $3.6 billion in damages would cripple the small territory. Governor Gus Jaspert declared a state of emergency, the first in the BVI's history. Meanwhile, in the US Virgin Islands, the 2 most populous of the islands, St. John's and St. Thomas, were subjected to the unrelenting punishment of Irma's eye wall. The story was much the same, however, as the BVI, with almost all vegetation defoliated and mass destruction of the buildings and infrastructure. As Irma tracked west-northwest, it grazed Puerto Rico's northern coast on September 6th through the 7th. The storm's eye, however, remained about 50 miles offshore, sparing the island from a direct hit, but winds would still gust over 100 miles per hour in places, and the northeastern coast was lashed with storm surge and heavy rain. Puerto Rico's electrical grid, already fragile from years of neglect, would sustain damage that left nearly 1 million people temporarily without power. For an island that would be catastrophically struck just 2 weeks later, Irma would serve as both a warning and a cruel prelude. The storm then brushed along the northern coast of Hispaniola, keeping its core just offshore. The Dominican Republic saw significant coastal flooding and power outages, though not the full brunt of the storm. Even so, heavy rains triggered mudslides and flooding in some communities. And by September 8th, Irma had maintained Category 5 intensity for nearly 3 straight days. Turning slightly to the southwest, the storm would then take aim at Cuba. At 3 a.m. UTC on September 9th, Irma would strike Cayo Romano on Cuba's north coast with winds of 165 miles per hour, becoming the first Category 5 to make landfall on the island since 1924. Interaction, however, with Cuba's landmass thankfully weakened Irma from its Category 5 state to a Category 2 hurricane. But warm waters once again refueled the storm as it moved off of Cuba and over the Florida Straits, next setting its sights on the state of Florida. While forecasters deduced that Irma would eventually end up in the vicinity of Florida and be a threat to the state days in advance, uncertainty in the forecast models on where the storm would eventually impact remained extremely high. Consensus would show that the storm would turn north in the Florida Straits, but where was anyone's guess? And every mile of difference in the track would make the difference between who saw the worst weather. Compounding the confusion was also the constant shift in the modeling, what we call windshield wipering. The computer models started riding the storm up the east coast of the state, to then riding it up the west coast of the state, to a middle ground of riding up the spite of the peninsula, which is ultimately what happened. But ultimately, most forecasts showed the entire state of Florida within the cone of uncertainty. And by September 7th, Florida Governor Rick Scott had declared a state of emergency for the entire state, hastening Floridians' preparations in advance of the storm. Since the storm's first impact to Barbuda, Floridians had been watching Irma's approach with mounting dread. The state, after all, had not experienced a landfalling major hurricane since Wilma last did so in 2005, and had only been struck by a hurricane once since then as well, with 2016's landfall of Category 1 Hurricane Hermine. For the millions of people who had moved to Florida since 2005, their experience with hurricanes was absolutely minimal, and their preparations and patience were about to be put to the ultimate test. With scenes of devastation of the Caribbean islands, the drowning of Houston under rains from Harvey, and the vast swath of its population experiencing their first hurricane, storm anxiety in Florida ran wild. And as coastal counties began their evacuation process, many new Floridians panicked. In an eerie similarity to Houston's evacuation ahead of Hurricane Rita, hundreds of thousands to even millions of people who even weren't ordered to evacuate decided to join those who were under evacuation orders and fled the state. This mass movement of people on the state's limited northbound roadways out of major cities like Miami, Tampa, and Orlando, such as I-75, I-95, and the Turnpike, soon became clogged with evacuation traffic. Fuel shortages due to the increased demand led to long lines at gas stations and hotels hundreds of miles inland from places as far away as Louisiana and Virginia would fill with evacuees from Florida. Even Disney World closed its gates in advance of the hurricane for only the 5th time in the park's history. The sheer scale of the evacuation posed logistical nightmares for Floridians. Hospitals also had to relocate patients, prisons would have to move inmates, and thousands of nursing home residents were transferred out of state. In some areas, the evacuation itself became life-threatening as vulnerable residents faced heat, stress, and uncertainty on the gridlocked highways. My family's first experience with a hurricane was Irma, and we too sat on I-75 for nearly 23 hours trying to get to Tuscaloosa, Alabama ahead of the storm, which on a normal day would take only 11 hours or so. Ultimately, 6.5 million Floridians would evacuate ahead of Irma, greatly surpassing the Hurricane Rita evacuations out of Houston in 2005 and what is still the largest single evacuation in US history. Finally, after days of waiting with constant dread, on the morning of September 10th, Irma roared into the lower Florida Keys as a Category 4 hurricane, making landfall at Cudjoe Key around 9:10 a.m. Eastern Time with 130-mile-per-hour winds, and becoming the first major hurricane to strike the state of Florida directly in 12 years. Unfortunately, the lower Keys suffered severe damage. Mobile homes were shredded, boats sunk, and entire neighborhoods were inundated by the surge. On Big Pine Key, a gust of 130 miles per hour was recorded. Nearly a quarter of all homes in the Keys were destroyed, and over 65% of them sustained major damage. For many longtime residents, Irma became the worst storm for the Florida Keys since 1960's Hurricane Donna, and for others, since the 1935 Labor Day hurricane. Later in the day on the 10th, Irma would then make a second U.S. landfall near Marco Island on Florida's southwest coast in Collier County, this time as a Category 3 hurricane with 115-mile-per-hour winds, and Naples recording the highest wind gust, clocking in at a staggering 142 miles per hour. While it was mainly Irma's winds that garnered the headlines, the storm's vast wind field generated very large storm surge values, even hundreds of miles from its landfall point, causing damage across both coasts of the peninsula. Storm surge heights reached 10 feet in the Florida Keys, while Jacksonville, nearly 400 miles from the point of landfall in the opposite side of the state, endured its worst flooding in 150 years as Irma's winds funneled the waters of the Atlantic into the St. Johns River. Meanwhile, on the Gulf Coast, a rare reverse surge where the storm's winds push vast amounts of water out of areas along the coast, such as Tampa Bay and Sarasota Bay, caused water levels to bottom out about 5 feet below normal low tide. Irma's track eventually carried it northward through the heart of Florida. Tampa, long considered one of the most vulnerable cities to storm surge, braced for a direct hit, but fortunately, Irma's slight inland track spared the city from the worst-case scenario. Yet widespread flooding would still occur. Orlando, more than 50 miles from the coast, endured hurricane-force gusts that toppled trees and cut off power. And by September 11th, Irma had weakened into a tropical storm over northern Florida, but its vast wind field extended hurricane-force gusts into Georgia and South Carolina. All told, Irma's human toll was immense. Across the Caribbean and the United States, at least 134 people were killed. Financially, Irma caused an estimated $77.2 billion in damages, making it the 6th costliest tropical cyclone on record. In Cuba, it was the most expensive hurricane in the nation's history. And in Florida, Irma became the costliest hurricane to hit the state until 2022's Hurricane Ian, with insured losses topped at $20 billion, and many uninsured homeowners being left destitute and homeless. Relief efforts would span multiple nations. France, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom had to dispatch military ships and planes to aid their Caribbean territories. The US federal government mobilized FEMA, while the US military conducted airlifts of supplies into both the US Virgin Islands and the Florida Keys. But recovery was slow and painful. Irma etched its name into meteorological history. It produced the 3rd highest accumulated cyclone energy ever recorded for a single storm, trailing only the 1899 San Curacao hurricane and the 1932 Cuba hurricane. Its 37-hour stretch at 180-mile-per-hour winds remains unmatched. Irma also underscored the vulnerability of small island nations. In places like Barbuda and St. Martin, one storm effectively erased decades of progress in infrastructure and economy. And for Florida, the storm reinforced the perils of mass evacuations as logistical challenges reached unprecedented levels. Even as Irma dissipated over Missouri on September 13th, meteorologists were now tracking a new system rolling westward in the central Atlantic. And the cruel sequence of 2017 would continue on. Even as the Caribbean struggled to recover from Irma's devastation, meteorologists watched with growing dread as another tropical wave emerged from the eastern Atlantic in mid-September. The basin, already supercharged by abnormally warm waters and minimal wind shear, was primed for disaster. On September 16, 2017, the system they were tracking would be named Tropical Storm Maria. Within hours, forecasters grew uneasy. Maria was organizing with alarming speed, and by the morning of September 17th, reconnaissance aircraft found a forming eye, and by that evening, the storm had strengthened into a hurricane. The next day, Maria underwent explosive intensification. Winds leapt from 90 to 160 miles per hour in less than 24 hours. And by September 18th, it had become a Category 5 monster with 160 mile per hour winds and a pressure of 925 millibars. The Caribbean, still reeling from Irma, now faced an even deadlier threat. Maria's first catastrophic landfall came that night as its eye crossed the small island of Dominica. With sustained winds of 160 miles per hour, it was the strongest hurricane in the island's recorded history, and the devastation was nearly absolute. Forests were shredded, trees were ripped bare as if scorched by fire, and 90% of the buildings were damaged or destroyed. Even the roof of the Prime Minister's residence was ripped away, forcing Prime Minister Roosevelt Scarrett to be rescued from his flooded home. At least 31 Dominicans were killed, and the economy, anchored in agriculture, was obliterated. Banana and citrus plantations, the livelihoods of thousands on the island, were flattened. And overnight, Maria pushed Dominica's development back decades. As Maria turned westward out of the Lesser Antilles, the monstrous hurricane had now set its sights directly on Puerto Rico. Still reeling from Irma's glancing blow, which had left nearly 1 million residents without power, many understood that the U.S. territory was not prepared adequately for a direct hit. On September 18th, Territorial Governor Ricardo Rosselló declared a state of emergency. Schools closed, government offices shuttered. FEMA teams already on the island began staging food, water, and generators. All while the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, or PREPA, warned that if the island sustained a direct strike, power outages could last for not days, but months. Evacuations were ordered in flood-prone and coastal zones, and hospitals scrambled to stockpile fuel for generators, all while fuel shortages loomed. Yet, even with all the effort, few Puerto Ricans were truly prepared for what was coming. At 6:15 a.m. Atlantic Standard Time on September 20th, 2017, Maria would make landfall as a high-end Category 4 hurricane with sustained winds of 155 miles per hour. What followed was the single biggest disaster in Puerto Rico's modern history. As Maria's catastrophic winds tore across the island, they tore apart not just the island's beauty, homes, and businesses, but also the island's fragile electrical grid. Transmission towers crumbled, power lines tangled across roadways, and the entire territory and its 3.4 million U.S. citizens was plunged into darkness as the power grid collapsed. This was not a temporary outage, and in remote mountain communities, electricity was not fully restored for nearly a year, a full 11 months, making it the longest blackout in U.S. history. Without power, water pumps failed, hospitals rationed dwindling fuel, and communications went silent. Across Puerto Rico's 78 municipalities, isolation reigned. Landslides and debris blocked highways. Cell towers toppled, severing families from one another. Meanwhile, Maria's rainfall unleashed further catastrophe. Totals exceeded 35 inches in the mountains, triggering floods and mudslides that cut off some towns for weeks. On the coast, storm surge inundated low-lying communities, compounding the misery. And in the immediate aftermath, PR government officials reported just 64 fatalities, but the true human toll soon came into focus. A George Washington University study would estimate 2,975 excess deaths in the 6 months after Maria, while Harvard researchers would place the figure closer to 4,645. In 2018, Puerto Rico's government revised the official death toll to nearly 3,000, cementing Maria as the deadliest U.S. hurricane of the 21st century. Financially, the toll was staggering. Maria wreaked $91.6 billion in damage to Puerto Rico. Homes, schools, hospitals, and factories would lay in ruins. Agriculture, 80% of crop value, was annihilated. Tourism would evaporate, and the storm would accelerate Puerto Rico's already dire financial crisis, forcing tens of thousands into exodus. More than 130,000 residents would leave, migrating to the mainland U.S. within a year of Maria's devastation of the island. These self-declared hurricane refugees reshaped demographics on the mainland and were later attributed to changes in political landscapes from Florida to New York and beyond. The federal response to Maria quickly became a subject of fierce debate. FEMA deployed thousands of people and shipped millions of meals and gallons of water to the island. The U.S. military would launch Operation Unified Response, yet the aid was painfully slow to reach those in need. Bureaucratic delays would leave supplies stranded on docks, while rural towns would go hungry. And in some areas, tarps for roofs arrived only months later. President Trump's administration drew sharp criticism for its botched response in Puerto Rico, and the infamous image of Trump tossing paper towels to storm victims in San Juan became an enduring symbol of indifference. Beyond Puerto Rico, Maria left destruction across the Caribbean. In Dominica, 90% of homes were damaged and 31 lives were lost. The U.S. Virgin Islands suffered more crippling wind and surge damage on top of what had already occurred during Irma. Guadeloupe and Martinique endured flooding, 2 deaths, and widespread infrastructure losses as well. Meteorologically, Maria would join the ranks of history's fiercest storms. With a central pressure of just 908 millibars and peak winds of 175 miles per hour, it was among the most intense Atlantic hurricanes on record. Its rapid intensification from Category 1 to Category 5 in just 36 hours was a chilling reminder of how little time islands sometimes have to prepare. For Puerto Ricans, Maria was more than a hurricane. It was the island's turning point. The blackout, the deaths, the migration, all reshaped the island's identity. To this day, many speak of life in 2 eras, before Maria and after. By late September 2017, the Atlantic had witnessed 3 catastrophic landfalls: Harvey in Texas, Irma across the Caribbean and Florida, and Maria in Puerto Rico. Any one of them could have defined a season, but together they formed an unprecedented triad of disaster. By the end of November 2017, meteorologists tallied the numbers and struggled to comprehend them. 17 named storms, 10 hurricanes, 6 major hurricanes, and a total accumulated cyclone energy of 224.9 units, the 7th highest on record. But it wasn't just the statistics. It was the fact that 3 catastrophic storms, Harvey, Irma, and Maria, struck in such rapid succession, each leaving behind a humanitarian crisis of historic proportion. Harvey's floods, Irma's winds, and Maria's blackout collectively cemented 2017 as the costliest hurricane season on record worldwide, with damages exceeding $294.8 billion. The Atlantic Basin had seen destructive years before, of course: 2005 with Katrina, 1992 with Andrew, 1938 with the Long Island Express, but never had so many catastrophic landfalls occurred in such a compressed time frame. The storms collectively claimed at least 3,369 lives, with the majority of those occurring in Puerto Rico after Maria. For context, that figure rivals or exceeds death tolls from many of the 20th century's most infamous hurricanes. Each storm carried its own human tragedy. In Texas, Harvey's rains drowned entire families, forced rooftop rescues, and displaced hundreds of thousands. In the Caribbean, Irma's winds leveled islands, leaving tens of thousands homeless. In Puerto Rico, Maria's aftermath claimed more lives than the storm itself, as lack of electricity, water, and medical supplies persisted for months. But the human suffering was not confined to just the immediate casualties. Mental health crises, depression, PTSD, and suicides spiked across the impacted regions, and the pain of migration reshaped communities as families fled impacted areas to start life anew. The season's economic fallout was also staggering. Hurricane Harvey caused roughly $125 billion in damages, largely from the flooding in Texas, tying the infamous Hurricane Katrina as the costliest natural disaster in the United States' history. Then, Hurricane Irma caused $77 billion in damages, including in Florida, on Cuba, and throughout the multiple Caribbean islands subjected to the storm's unrelenting fury. And finally, Hurricane Maria wrought nearly $91.6 billion in damages, primarily inflicted on the island of Puerto Rico. Insurance companies faced record-breaking claims. The National Flood Insurance Program, already under financial strain, was pushed to the brink. In addition to the tangible destruction, the 2017 season forced a reckoning across multiple sectors of government and society. Harvey revealed the limits of FEMA's floodplain maps. Many Houston residents outside the high-risk zones flooded and were often uninsured. Calls for reform included updated maps, expanded coverage, and stronger buyout programs for chronically flood-prone homes. Maria's collapse of Puerto Rico's electrical grid exposed deep structural weaknesses. The storm accelerated conversations about grid hardening, decentralized power systems, and renewable energy adoption. And in subsequent years, microgrids and solar plus storage initiatives expanded on the island, though progress has been relatively uneven. Irma highlighted the dangers of mass evacuation in a populous state. Recall that 6.5 million Floridians took to their cars in flooded states' highways, straining its infrastructure and fuel supply. Officials would later review evacuation zones, fuel distribution strategies, and contraflow traffic policies. And while FEMA earned praise for rapid mobilization during Harvey and Irma, Maria exposed the challenges in serving U.S. territories. Distribution bottlenecks, political friction, and logistical hurdles led to delayed aid. And in later years, FEMA invested in more pre-staged supplies and partnerships with local organizations on the island of Puerto Rico. For meteorologists, 2017 was not just a season of disaster, but a laboratory to test theories related to a changing climate. Research conducted during and in the years following 2017 suggests that the apocalyptic rainfall totals from Hurricane Harvey were linked to a resulting increase in atmospheric moisture values from the warmer sea surface temperatures. Additionally, more recent research on rapid intensification events, such as those that occurred with Harvey, Irma, and Maria, as well as 2018's Hurricane Michael and 2022's Hurricane Ian, suggests that these types of events will become more common with warmer oceans and higher ocean heat content values. Regardless of the debate on climate change, the 2017 season became a rallying point for those on all sides to come together and advocate for resilience planning and infrastructure hardening to cope with the more destructive storms. Yet, despite all of the devastation, the stories of resilience would emerge. In Houston, the hashtag HoustonStrong symbolized community solidarity. Volunteers from across the state and nation joined rescue and rebuilding efforts. And in the Florida Keys, residents would return quickly, vowing to rebuild despite catastrophic damage. In Puerto Rico, grassroots organizations stepped in where the government failed. Community kitchens, solar projects, and local aid networks all became lifelines while the images of 2017 became etched into public consciousness. Texans being rescued by boat through flooded freeways, the ghostly emptiness of Barbuda, its population evacuated, the Florida Keys littered with debris after Irma, Puerto Ricans queuing for water, the island dark from space. And in all, the 2017 hurricane season brought hurricanes into the modern social media age and led to unique natural disaster references into the pop culture of the US and Caribbean. Terms like Armageddon and Maria's blackout entered the vernacular, and many documentaries, news retrospectives, and survivor testimonies from the period ensured the season would not be forgotten. The 2017 Atlantic hurricane season drew immediate comparisons to 2005's Katrina, Rita, Wilma, and 1992's Andrew. While 2005 had remained unmatched in storm frequency at the time, 2017 surpassed it in concentrated financial cost. But unlike Andrew, which had devastated South Florida and Louisiana, 2017 led to multiple regions experiencing catastrophic storms in rapid succession. Nearly a decade later, the scars of 2017 remain visible. Texas continues to wrestle with flood control as extreme rainfall events become more common. Florida has since updated the FBC 3 times in 2017, 2020, and 2023, while also continuing to rework the state's disaster planning for an ever-increasing population. Puerto Rico, meanwhile, grapples with power grid instability, economic stagnation, and a legacy of migration that has completely reshaped its communities and culture, both on the island and in the mainland US. For survivors, these storms are not just history, but a lived reality. Reminders of the vulnerability, the resilience, and the thin line between order and chaos. For the United States, a nation that had dodged bullet after bullet in the years following the devastation of 2005, the 2017 season marked a return of the hurricanes and a reminder that every season has the potential to be someone's worst nightmare. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out my channel. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss more content like these. Thanks again, CJ, Florida Man Weather.